A storm rolled over Dusty Creek the night Levi Quinn heard a scream. He found her on the kitchen floor, Nora Hale, arrow through her back, blood on the tiles, a key pressed into his hand. "Root cellar," she gasped. Outside, 6 men waited. Their leader grinned through the rain. They weren't thieves. They were collectors, for a debt Nora never signed. Levi wasn't the fastest draw, or the loudest voice, but he knew how to read people and how to wait. What started with pain and silence would end with something else. A plan, patient and precise, and justice, without swagger. But with every step, the truth got harder to carry. So, tell me, what would you do if you had one chance to turn a weapon into mercy? And the law was watching. The sky above Dusty Creek cracked open with thunder, and Levi Quinn pulled his slicker tighter around his shoulders. His horse, a grizzled paint named Boomer, picked its way down the muddy trail with the kind of patience that came from years of riding fence lines and dodging prairie storms. They were miles out from town, following no trail in particular, just the old instincts that sometimes tugged Levi where he needed to be. Lightning flared, revealing a rundown homestead huddled against the hills. Fencing sagged. Smoke trickled from a chimney that looked too thin to fight the cold. Something about it gave Levi pause. He'd passed this place before, once when the man who owned it, Daniel Hale, had flagged him down for help digging a stuck wagon. They hadn't spoken long, but Daniel struck him as decent, honest, poor, but proud. Boomer whinnied low. Levi's eyes narrowed. A second flash of lightning showed the front door hanging crooked. The yard was littered with overturned chairs, and a broken rake lay half buried in the mud. Pots clattered inside, though no wind had touched them. He swung down, boots sinking into wet earth, and approached slow. His hand rested near the handle of his knife, not drawn, but ready. The moment he stepped over the threshold, his breath caught. A woman was on the floor, knees splayed beneath her calico skirt, hair soaked and tangled around her face. Blood patterned the wood around her, dark and growing. An arrow stuck out of her back, driven straight through, the wooden shaft quivering with every shallow breath she took. "Nora," Levi said hoarsely, recognizing Daniel's wife. "You with me?" She blinked, lips bloodless. Her hands trembled as she reached out, not for help, but for him to come closer. Levi knelt beside her, careful not to jostle the shaft. "They're coming back," she rasped. "Said the debt ain't paid. Daniel, they took him. God, Levi, they took him and said I'd be next." "Debt?" he asked, tearing a dish towel from a peg and pressing it lightly around the wound. "Who?" Her eyes were glassy, but locked onto his with a surprising clarity. "Silas Thorne's men. Said Daniel owed for a loan he never took. They wanted the stash. Daniel said there wasn't one." She reached under her skirt and pressed something small and cold into his hand, a tiny brass key. "Root cellar," she whispered. "Left side wall." Levi closed his fingers around the key, heart thudding. Outside, hoofbeats, heavy and deliberate, mud sucking at boots. He looked around quickly. A boiling pot on the stove hissed, forgotten. The windows rattled. The doorframe was splintered where someone had already kicked through once. He had no rifle, just the old revolver at his side, and no real cover. But there was something else he had. Time. Maybe not much, but enough for a move. He leaned down. "I'm gonna get you through this," he said softly. She gave the barest nod. Then the latch lifted. The front door swung wide and banged back against the wall. Rain fell in sheets behind the silhouettes of 6 men, lanterns in hand. At the center stood a squat man with a sawed-off shotgun, balanced easy in one arm, his oilskin coat dripping. His beard was braided with silver coins, and his eyes were cold. "Well, I'll be," the man drawled. "A saddle tramp and a bleeding woman. Looks like the Hale family's brought in company Levi didn't stand." He stayed kneeling beside Nora, fingers just behind the arrow, and said nothing. "You got 10 seconds to tell me where the stash is, cowboy," the man said. "Or she bleeds out for nothing. Or maybe I take a toe off for motivation." Behind him, one of the gang laughed. Another kicked mud off his boots on the doorstep. Levi's mind raced. The key in his hand felt like fire. He could stall. He could bluff. He could beg. But the woman beside him was breathing shallow, and the shaft would have to come out or go through. He took a breath and stared up into the storm. The door swung wider. The gang stepped in. And Levi Quinn made his first quiet calculation. The storm hissed through the open door, spattering mud across the warped floorboards as the gang stepped into the Hale kitchen. Levi didn't flinch. He stayed low beside Nora, one hand pressed lightly against her shoulder. The other wrapped around the tiny key she'd given him, still slick with her blood. The leader, the one with the braided beard and sawed off, sniffed the air like a man who could smell lies. "Name's Clay Beck," he said. "Thorne's man. I don't like games. Now, where's the stash?" Levi didn't blink. "You're too late," he said, voice steady. "He already moved it." Said the first man through the door was a fool, the men chuckled, but it was nervous laughter. Beck's eyes narrowed. "Funny, since he ain't home." Levi nodded toward Nora, shot before she could tell me where. Beck scowled and looked down at her. "She's still breathing. Pull that thing out. She'll sing." Levi shook his head. "It'll kill her." Beck leaned in. "Then I suggest you find your tongue, cowboy, because in about 3 seconds I'll—" He didn't finish. In one clean move, Levi braced his knees, grabbed the shaft near Nora's spine, and shoved it forward, clean through. She gasped, arched, then collapsed flat, unconscious but alive. He broke the shaft against the floor, binding it down with his boot. The gang startled. One man cursed. In the second of confusion, Levi snatched the dropped gun from the nearest man's loosened grip. He didn't fire. He didn't need to. "Out," he said. Calm, cold. They hesitated, 6 against 1, but something in his eyes made even Beck take a step back. "She's dead anyway," Beck growled. "No," Levi said. "She'll live, and next time you come back, I'll have witnesses. You got no badge. I got reason." And neighbors, Beck's jaw clenched. His eyes lingered on the bloody floor, the pot still boiling behind Levi, and the rifle that now lay pointed in their general direction. He spat in the dirt. "Tell Thorne his debt collector failed," Levi said, "and if he's got a grievance, he can bring it to court." That got a few guffaws from the men behind Beck, but they backed out, slowly, muttering. One tipped his hat in mock salute. Then they were gone. Hooves clattered off into the rain, swallowed by the hills. Levi dropped the borrowed gun to the table and breathed hard. His hands were steady, but his stomach twisted. He turned back to Nora, who hadn't moved. Her lips were pale. Blood soaked through her back and pooled beneath her ribs, but she was breathing, just barely. "I need to see what's in that root cellar," he muttered. He lit the old lantern from the hearth and found the trapdoor near the back pantry. The key clicked to the padlock, and he swung it open. Below, the air was musty. The root cellar held no gold, no boxes of coins, just a cedar chest tucked behind a false wall of crates. Inside it lay a folded map, a worn ledger wrapped in oilcloth, and a velvet bag that clinked soft when moved. He opened the ledger first. Mining records, signatures, survey notes in a woman's hand. The map showed a small section of creek bed behind the barn, marked with an X and the word Seep. He looked again at the ledger. Nora Hale's maiden name at the top, clear as day, filed. Before her marriage, before any supposed debt. Downstairs, she groaned. Levi closed the chest, locked it again, and returned to her side. He dressed the wound as best he could. His shirt made a poor bandage, but it slowed the bleeding. He found coffee in the cupboard, brewed it over a low flame. By dawn, Nora stirred. He was there, beside her, hat in his hands. "Daniel?" she whispered. Levi hesitated. "Didn't see him, but I'll go look." She nodded, barely awake. He saddled Boomer and followed the trail down past the east fence line. The creek ran high with runoff. There, caught in the reeds, was a boot. Levi dismounted. The man's body had been dumped face down, hands bound with twine. Daniel Hale. Levi covered him with his coat. Quiet, steady. He didn't curse or shout, just knelt, bowed his head, and whispered a promise. Before sunset, he rode back to town. There'd be no justice from Silas Thorne's bank, not without help. So, Levi knocked on the door of old Harlan Boone, retired, prospector, sharp as ever, then preacher Ezra Pike, who believed in mercy but didn't mind raising a voice for truth. This time, it wouldn't be fists or bullets. It'd be facts, light, and witnesses. Because when the law gets bought, it's up to the neighbor to bring the truth. And if you believe that matters, drop a comment. Folks like Nora need more than stories. They need someone who stays. Levi laid the folded map on Harlan Boone's table, careful not to crease the old paper more than it already was. The lantern hissed above them, casting long shadows across the prospector's cluttered cabin. Pans, hammers, and chunks of rock stacked on every shelf. Harlan adjusted his spectacles and leaned in. This came from Nora's root cellar? Levi nodded. Her husband's gone. Raiders said they came for a debt, but this ledger's in her maiden name. Filed before she married Daniel Harlan let out a low whistle. Smart woman. Might have done that so no man could claim it without her say-so, even as how. Husband, he turned to the second page, finger tracing a seal in faded red wax. This stamp, that's the old territorial recorder. Legit ain't used since '86, Levi pointed to the second sheet. This is the bank lien they left behind. Issued under Daniel Hale's name only. Different seal, thinner parchment, and look close. Wrong embossing. Thorne used last year's seal. Harlan squinted. Well, I'll be. They sat in silence, both men turning over the implications. If Nora's name is on the mineral claim and Thorne's lien is in Daniel's alone, Levi said, then that loan don't cover her land, not legally. Harlan grinned, yellow-toothed and sharp. Won't stop Thorne from pretending it does. Levi pulled the map closer. There's more. Look here. See where the creek bends behind her barn? Uh-huh. That's where the X is marked. It says seep. You think that's a spring? Harlan shrugged. Could be. Plenty of underground seeps feed that creek. If it comes from under her boundary, she's got priority rights, first use, first claim. Even against a bank lien, water trumps paper, long as you got proof. Levi tapped the table. I'm thinking we mark that seep. File for a survey. Serve an injunction, Harlan looked up. That takes time. Thorne owns the judge and half the courthouse clerks. He'll bury you in delay. Then we make it public, Levi said. No back rooms. Full light, Harlan leaned back in his chair. You're serious. Levi nodded once. Ezra Pike arrived that evening with a thermos of broth and a bundle of folded canvas. I checked in on Nora, the preacher said. She's weak, but healing. Said to tell you thank you. Levi nodded. She also said, Ezra added with a quiet smile, that her pa used to call her hard-headed as a rain mule. Said she never trusted banks or town men who use three-syllable words. She's right not to, Levi said, unfolding the canvas. Inside lay the affidavit papers, filled in and signed. Ezra's name was already on the witness line. She asked me to put it down plain, Ezra said, that she never authorized any debt under her name, nor allowed Daniel to act on her behalf. Harlan whistled again. Preacher, you just put a hammer to Thorne's glass house. Ezra's smile faded. Don't count him out. Word is, he's heading to the county seat to file counterclaims. Might get that injunction reversed before it even prints, then we file fast, Levi said, and move that chest. It don't belong anywhere but under lock and key in the courthouse vault. I know a wagon team, Ezra said. Trustworthy. No tongues, Levi stood, setting his hat on his head. And I'll head to Dusty Creek proper. We'll need the sheriff to agree to the survey. You think he'll listen? Levi paused at the door. Tom Duffy ain't a bad man, just tired. Maybe he needs reminding what fair looks like. Ezra stepped forward. You planning to do this quiet or loud? Just loud enough, Levi said. As he saddled Boomer the next morning, the town bell rang 5. Chimes, rain still hung in the air, but the sky was beginning to lighten. Nora's land, her future, depended not on fists or force, but on truth. He looked once more at the sealed envelope in his saddlebag. The injunction, the map, and the ledger affidavit all folded neat. Because when power tries to twist the law, it takes steady hands to set it straight. By Saturday, Dusty Creek had mostly dried out, but the ground still held the smell of rain. Folks gathered near the churchyard, spreading out quilts, pie tins, and tin cups of lemonade on folding tables. It was the annual town picnic, half celebration, half town hall, and the kind of event where reputations get built or broken. Levi arrived just past noon, leading Boomer with a pack satchel slung over the saddle horn. He wore a clean shirt, boots scrubbed of trail mud, and the same calm expression that hadn't left his face since the night Nora was shot. Sheriff Tom Duffy stood near the cider barrels, arms folded over a wide chest, gray around the edges but not soft. When Levi approached, the sheriff looked up and gave a tired nod. Quinn, sheriff, you here to eat or stir trouble? Levi didn't smile. Neither. I came to show a map. Talk water rights, Duffy sighed. Not today. Today's the only day folks are listening. Before the sheriff could reply, a hush swept over the crowd. Silas Thorne had arrived. He wore a dark blue suit that didn't suit the heat, a polished cane tapping with each step. He smiled like a preacher, but held himself like a banker too used to winning. Behind him walked Clay Beck and two other men in town coats, each of them watching Levi like they were measuring him for something. Thorne wasted no time. He climbed onto the edge of the bandstand, raised a hand. "Friends," he began, voice smooth, "I won't take much of your day. I just want to remind everyone what holds this town together: good business, honest loans, and law-abiding neighbors." He pulled a paper from his coat and waved it. "Now, some of you may have heard lies about debts unpaid and land stolen, but I hold here a lien signed by the late Daniel Hale, a man who borrowed in good faith. The Hale homestead, by rights, now falls under repayment. It's a sad thing, but we don't get to choose our debts." The crowd murmured. Levi stepped forward, unfolding the map with care. "Silas," he said plainly, "that lien's in Daniel's name. But this claim here," he held up a second paper, "was filed years before that loan, in Nora Hale's maiden name. She never signed anything. She never agreed to sell." Thorne chuckled. "That's not how it works." Ezra Pike stood then, lifting his voice with just enough warmth to carry. "It is how it works. You can't collect what you don't own." Levi stepped toward the side of the field, where two wooden stakes had been hammered into the ground earlier that morning. He tied a rope between them, stretched taut. This rope marks the distance between Nora's filed boundary and a natural spring seep. That feeds the creek. It's marked on this map and corroborated in the ledger. Water law says prior use wins. Tom Duffy scratched his chin. Thorne frowned. "A map and a rope don't beat a court seal." "Which is why I'm asking," Levi said, eyes still on the sheriff, "for a county survey, in public view, with volunteers to stand witness. No tricks, no backdoor filings." The sheriff looked between the men. "What's this really about, Levi?" "It's about a widow trying to hold her land, a banker trying to claim what's not his, and a town deciding if the law is paper or people." Silence followed. Then a voice called out, "I'll stand watch." Then another, "Me too." Ezra turned. "Let's walk the markers." A small crowd followed Levi to the creek head where cairns marked the seep. They talked quiet, studied the map, and nodded. But that night, Levi's breath caught when he saw torchlight moving beyond Nora's fence. He rode out at dawn and found fresh posts hammered in, ropes strung tight across the zone, water line on her side of the boundary. A makeshift dam had begun. He dismounted, crouched, and touched the wet rope. Not sabotage, not subtle, a challenge. And if a line in the dirt can be crossed so easy, what would you do to hold your ground? Tell us in the comments. These stories aren't just old, they're still being lived. Levi didn't wait for the sheriff to show up. By first light, he and Harlan were already out at the creek bed, where the crude dam had been laid overnight. Ropes, planks, and stacked stones narrowed the flow to a trickle. Mud backed up on Nora's side, turning the garden patch near her barn into a swamp. Harlan squatted low, ran his fingers through the rising muck. "They ain't subtle, I'll give 'em that." Levi took a slow breath. "It's bait." "You sure?" "Thorne's daring us to tear it down ourselves. That way, he can cry sabotage and file a complaint." "Then what's the play?" Levi stood. "We don't destroy it. We bypass it." He pulled a surveyor's stake from his saddlebag and walked 20 yards upstream, past the line Nora's ledger mapped out. There, just under a thicket of wild sage, the ground was darker, soft even in dry weather. "This is the seep," he said. Harlan nodded. "If we dig a narrow trench, keep it shallow but pointed, we can redirect just enough water to prove its flow. Quietly. No hammers, no fuss." They worked side by side with trench shovels until the sun cleared the ridge. The trickle that emerged ran clean and slow, spilling just past Nora's side of the boundary. It wasn't flashy, but it was proof. It would be enough for a surveyor to follow, and enough to show where the true water source began. Back at the homestead, Nora sat on the porch in a blanket, pale but upright. Her wounds still hurt with every breath, but she'd insisted on seeing the land with her own eyes. "Looks better," she said, squinting at the low trench. "It's the truth made visible," Levi replied. "Then make it official," she whispered. By noon, Ezra Pike had arranged transport to the county seat. Levi rode alongside the wagon carrying Nora's sealed envelope. Inside, her affidavit, the ledger copy, and the request for injunction. A separate chest held the original ledger and map, now wrapped in oilcloth and locked with a three-prong clasp. The courthouse at Willow Ridge stood plain and square, its doors wide open. The clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, raised an eyebrow when Levi presented the bundle. "We don't usually see injunctions filed by ranch women," he said. "Then it's about time you did," Levi answered. They filed everything, took duplicate stamps, and arranged for the county surveyor to visit within 3 days. It felt, for a moment, like the law might hold. But as Levi stepped outside to remount, he barely cleared the first stair before 2 deputies blocked his way. "Levi Quinn?" one asked. "That's me." "You're under temporary hold. Trespassing and obstruction filed this morning by Silas Thorne's office." Levi didn't argue. "You've got no grounds," the deputy shrugged. "Don't need 'em, just the judge's ink." They confiscated his sidearm, shoved him against the post, and cuffed his wrists. His hat landed in the mud. Behind him, Thorne stepped out of the shadows with a smirk. "You should have stayed a saddle tramp, Quinn." Levi looked him in the eye. "And you should have stayed behind your desk." They hauled him all the way back to Dusty Creek in a hitched buckboard, cuffs tight, dust biting his throat. At the jailhouse, Sheriff Duffy signed the intake log but didn't meet Levi's gaze. He looked tired, ashamed even, like a man trying to thread a needle with a blindfold on. "You'll be out by morning," the sheriff said. "Ezra's already talking to the council." Levi gave a tight nod and sat on the cot, boots still on, arms crossed. He didn't pace, didn't shout, but the message was clear. Thorne wasn't done. He'd gone from sending men with arrows to throwing paper and politics like bullets, and the next move would come fast, harder than before. And when justice gets cuffed and paraded through the street, who stands up next? If you've ever watched good folks get dragged down just for telling the truth, don't stay silent. The iron bars of Dusty Creek's jail clicked shut behind Levi Quinn with a dull finality. He sat still on the wooden cot, hands resting on his knees, jaw tight. The cell smelled of dust, tobacco, and yesterday's sweat. Outside, boots echoed across the wooden floor as deputies milled about, pretending not to notice him. He'd spent his life keeping quiet, solving problems with sweat, not speeches. And now, here he was, locked up for trespassing on land that wasn't even Thorne's. The man knew how to twist a situation until it looked legal, even if it never smelled right. The front door creaked open. Levi didn't look up until a voice he knew too well filled the room. "Well now," Silas Thorne said, smooth as cream. "I figured I'd drop by, see how the reformer's holding up." Levi looked up, his face unreadable. Thorne stepped closer, stopping just outside the bars. "Funny thing about law, Quinn. It ain't about being right. It's about being first." Levi said nothing. Thorne grinned. "Tell Nora she can still sign a quitclaim deed. I'll even let her keep the house, long as she gives up water rights and the mineral claim." "You afraid of what the surveyor might find?" Levi asked, voice low. Thorne's grin faded a hair. "I'm offering mercy. Something you don't find often out here, but offers good for today only. She won't take it." "Oh, I think she might. Folks have a way of giving up when the ones who fight for them end up behind bars." Thorne tapped the bars with his cane and walked out, leaving the echo of his arrogance behind. As the day dragged on, no charges were officially filed. Just a hold for review, which meant Levi couldn't leave until someone bothered to care. He leaned back against the wall, staring at the knot in the ceiling beam above his head. Footsteps returned. Sheriff Tom Duffy stood at the cell door, rubbing his temple. "Ezra posted bail. I thought no charges were logged." "They weren't. Thorne's got the judge's ear. Bail's insurance." Levi stood, dusted off his pants. "You believe I did wrong?" Duffy hesitated. "No, but believing and acting don't always ride together. That's what got Nora in trouble. Folks who know better keeping their mouths shut." Duffy nodded once, shame in his shoulders. He unlocked the door without another word. Levi stepped out, boots heavy on the plank floor. Micah, the stable boy, waited outside the office, hat crushed in his hands. "Mr. Quinn?" Levi raised a brow. "You ought to be home, kid." Micah shook his head. "I saw something. 2 nights before the raid on the Hale place. Mr. Thorne met with that gang leader, Beck, gave him an envelope. They argued. Beck said, 'This ain't worth getting killed for.'" Levi crouched a little, eyes level with the boys. You'd swear to that? Yes, sir. I remember it. Clear. Levi looked over his shoulder. Ezra was already approaching with a notepad and a witness sheet. Write it down, the preacher said. We'll notarize it. Later that evening, Harlan arrived, face grim. The dam's gotten worse. They built it up overnight, pushed it past Nora's boundary line. Levi drew in a breath. Then it's time for something bigger. Ezra raised an eyebrow. You have a plan? Levi unrolled a sheet of paper he'd been scribbling on since the cell. Sketched maps, timing notes, a list of names. We don't tear the dam down, not yet. We gather folks at the creek for the survey. Sheriff, surveyor, townsfolk, all of it in the open. What if Thorne tries to stop it? Levi's jaw clenched. Let him try. But this time, we'll have eyes on every move. Micah folded his arms. You think they'll believe me? I do, Levi said gently, because you saw the truth. And when truth has a witness, it stands taller. Because even when power struts and good men sit in cells, sometimes, the smallest voice is what turns the tide. The sun hung high and hot over Dusty Creek when the county surveyor rode in, tall, hawk-nosed, and quiet. He stepped down from his mule with a brass instrument case in one hand and a folded county map in the other. Sheriff Tom Duffy met him at the gate, flanked by Ezra Pike and a dozen townsfolk who had come, not for spectacle, but because they finally wanted the truth said out loud. Levi stood beside Nora Hale, who leaned gently against a crutch. Her face was still pale, but her chin was lifted. Across the pasture, Silas Thorne waited with Clay Beck and two new security men who wore no badges but carried sidearms like invitations. Let's begin, the surveyor said plainly. They started at the barn, walked the eastern fence line, and reached the low trench Levi and Harlan had carved days earlier. The spring seep still flowed, clear and steady, just within Nora's original boundary markers. This is the point marked on the filed map, Levi said, handing the surveyor the copy of the ledger and map. The man compared notes, nodded once. Seep originates here. Boundary lines match what's recorded, Thorne scoffed from behind. A shallow trickle in the dirt don't mean a thing. This isn't a court. No, it's something stronger, Ezra said. It's witnesses. Levi stepped forward. This spring feeds the creek, not the other way around. That dam up there backs water onto Nora's land, violating her rights. The surveyor walked up to the rope dam and examined it. Constructed post-claim. It encroaches. Sheriff Duffy cleared his throat. You confirm this is her water source? The surveyor nodded. By geography and mapping, yes. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Levi turned to Ezra. You brought the ore sample? Ezra held up a small cloth pouch. Harlan came forward and unfolded the original ledger beside it. This vein, Harlan said, tapping the map, lines up with where I pulled this sample. Silver mixed with iron, matches the notes. She logged in the ledger. Thorne stepped forward, face tight. Enough! This is hearsay and theatrics. Levi met his gaze. Then let's hear from someone you didn't expect. Micah stepped forward, voice trembling but loud enough to carry. I saw Mr. Thorne give Clay Beck an envelope 2 nights before the raid. Said something about finishing the job, and Beck said it ain't worth getting killed for. Gasp stirred. Sheriff Duffy's face turned stone still. Sworn statement's been notarized, Ezra said, holding the paper up. Levi pulled out the final piece, the copy of the lien Thorne had filed. Look at the seal, Levi said. It's last year's die. The current county seal changed. That stamp ain't valid on new claims. The surveyor walked over, compared the seal on the lien with the current emboss on the county ledger. That's correct, he said. Seal's invalid. This lien wouldn't pass under updated regulation. Thorne's face flushed deep red. You're finished, Nora said quietly. You came to take what you couldn't earn. Thorne reached into his coat pocket. Don't, Duffy warned, stepping between them. But Thorne didn't draw a weapon. He pulled out a crumpled handkerchief and dabbed his brow. This town drinks from my water, he growled. Let's see how it survives without me. As he turned, Clay Beck barked an order, and 2 of Thorne's hired men began tearing out the marker stakes. Stand down, the sheriff bellowed, but it was too late. The entire town watched as Thorne's riders crossed the property line and ripped the posts free. Clear, public destruction of survey property. Duffy signaled. Deputize every man here, he said. Start with those 2. Rifles weren't drawn, but hands moved fast. The two riders were surrounded and disarmed without a fight. Thorn didn't speak. He just stared at Levi and Nora, hate burning behind his silence. And when a man tears truth from the ground in front of witnesses, what justice is left but the kind everyone can see, Sheriff Tom? Duffy stood firm as he cuffed the first of Thorn's hired men. The second rider, a wiry fellow with twitchy hands, tried to protest, but the sheriff had heard enough. "You destroyed state survey property in front of half the county," Duffy said flatly, "and you crossed into marked land with intent. That's no longer a land dispute. That's criminal trespass." The townsfolk had gone quiet, but the kind of quiet that simmers. Some held their hats in both hands. Others stood with arms crossed, eyes narrowed, not afraid, just watching, deciding what kind of town Dusty Creek really was. Silas Thorn, for once, said nothing. He stood off to the side now, coat dusty, hands still clutching his cane, but the smirk was gone. The sweat on his brow wasn't from heat. The surveyor jotted down notes, sealed them in an envelope, and handed them to the sheriff. "My report will confirm the spring originates on Mrs. Hale's property. Any damning effort beyond that point violates her water rights under prior appropriation law." "And the ore claim?" Ezra asked. The surveyor nodded. "Assuming the vein follows the map and matches the affidavit samples, and I believe it does, her mineral rights remain intact under her maiden claim." Levi stepped forward. "Then that lien Thorn filed is unenforceable," the surveyor finished. "Filed in the wrong name, under a previous seal. Any judge worth their bench would toss it." Duffy glanced at Thorn. "You've got 30 seconds to explain why I shouldn't arrest you for fraud, Silas." It was Harlan who added the final nail. He stepped forward holding the church marriage Bible from Ezra's chapel, open to a dog-eared page where Nora's maiden name, Elnora Whitcomb, was written alongside Daniel Hale's name in Ezra's own hand. "Filed and witnessed 3 years ago," Ezra said. "Her claim predates the marriage and holds separately." Nora, leaning on her crutch, took a slow breath. "You tried to erase me with paper, but I'm still standing." Thorn's jaw worked, but no sound came. Duffy took a step closer. "Clay Beck's already gone. His men turned on him after that stunt in the kitchen. If we dig into that envelope Micah saw, I wager we'll find enough to make conspiracy to defraud stick." Still, Thorn held his ground. "You think this ends me?" he hissed. "Dusty Creek still drinks my water. I've got the deeper well, the larger pipe. You can wave your survey papers and affidavits around, but when the heat comes back this summer, folks will crawl back begging." Levi didn't flinch. "We'll dig our own trench if we have to, and we'll do it together." Duffy gave the nod. "Silas Thorn, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction." He turned him around and locked the cuffs with a clean click. No one cheered, but there was a weight that lifted, silent, deep, and shared among every set of shoulders standing there. As the deputies led Thorn to the jail wagon, Nora looked down at the ground, then back at Levi. "You didn't have to stay," she said. "I know," he said, "but sometimes what's right doesn't holler. It just waits and holds." A breeze caught the edge of the folded ledger in Ezra's hand, fluttering the page like a bird stretching its wing. The creek beside them ran clear again, slow and sure. The sheriff approached quietly. "Surveyor says you can file the claim update first thing Monday. We'll move the ledger to the clerk's vault. Safest place for it now." Levi nodded. "And the dam? We'll tear it down tomorrow." With the town watching that evening as the last of the sun brushed gold across the pasture, Harlan leaned against the porch rail beside Levi. "Funny thing," he said. "Some men build their fortune with picks and shovels. Others just forge a stamp and pray no one looks too close." Levi looked out over the land, Nora seated by the doorway, a sleeping quilt around her shoulders. He looked, Levi said, and forgot who he was looking at. Because when you see someone as a signature and not a soul, you've already lost. The dam came down in the same quiet way it had been built, without fanfare, without fists, just hands, dozens of them. Sheriff Duffy brought rope cutters, Harlan brought a pry bar, Ezra brought coffee in tin cups. Even the town's youngest, Micah, stood knee-deep in the creek with his sleeves rolled, hauling out broken planks one by one. Levi didn't lead, but he didn't stand back either. He worked beside the others, eyes steady, shirt damp with effort. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about finishing what was right. By midday, the water flowed free. The trench Levi and Harlan had cut days earlier now joined clean into the widened creek bed, carrying clear, cold water across Nora's property again. The garden patch had drained, the soil breathing like it hadn't in weeks. Nora stood under the cottonwood near the porch, cane in hand, scar still red beneath her collarbone, but she was upright, chin high. "I never thought," she said softly, "I'd be here to see this." "You made it," Levi said, walking up beside her, "and not just because I showed up. You held the line before anyone else did." She looked at him, then out across the pasture. "You could have left after the arrow, after the jail, after any of it. I could have," he said. "But something about this land, about you, it made a man want to stay." From inside the house, Ezra stepped out holding a small wooden frame. "Thought you'd want this back where it belongs." He handed her the marriage Bible, now closed around the map and ledger, tied with a ribbon. "Clerk says the updated mineral filing is official. Surveyor signed off this morning," Harlan added. "And Thorne's bank is settling the court fees. They're cleaning house to avoid more charges." Nora gave a half smile. "Guess the creek runs clean in more ways than one." Ezra winked. "Funny how the truth, once seen, doesn't wash away so easy." Later that week, Micah rode out with a letter from the clerk's office confirming full restitution. Nora would retain the homestead, the mineral claim, and a formal apology would be published in the Dusty Creek Ledger. But that paper never made it to her mantle. Instead, a black and white photo took its place. Her standing beside Levi under the same cottonwood, her hair tucked behind one ear, him holding his hat respectfully in both hands. In the background, the creek glimmered like silver ribbon. She kept that photo in a wooden frame beside the ledger chest. Some evenings, when the sun slanted just right, Levi would come by with fresh beans or help replace the garden fencing. He never said much, but one day, as he repaired the sagging back gate, she asked, "You think you'll keep riding?" He paused. "I think I might be done drifting." She smiled. "Well, the garden needs planting, and I've got more fence than hands." Levi brushed his hat brim. "Then I reckon I'm home." They didn't rush a thing. But come spring, Ezra stood beneath the same cottonwood, asking two quiet folks if they meant to walk the rest of life together. They did. No crowds, no music, just a cottonwood's shade and the whisper of water over stone. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's a hand held steady, a voice that doesn't shake, and a promise that water and people will find their way home. If that kind of justice speaks to you, share this story. Let others know there's still a place for quiet courage and second chances.